In his book Christian Healing, Charles Fillmore wrote, "Some metaphysicians teach that man makes himself, others teach that God makes him, and still others hold that the creative process is a cooperation between God and man. The latter is proved true by those who have had the deepest spiritual experiences. God creates in the ideal, but it's up to us to bring these material ideas into manifestation in the material. Many people question this idea and do not recognize our role in the creative process. They believe that God is entirely responsible for events and circumstances that occur in the physical world. After all, haven't we all prayed, "Thy will be done"? However, our role in the creative process is essential. Our role in creation is how God's will is done. I've got a story, I think, that illustrates this. There was a man, and this man was a builder by trade. And I mean, he could build anything. Decks, porches. In fact, he could build the entire house if he needed or wanted to. He knew everything there was to know about building structures. He was also a very good father to 6 sons. One day, he wanted to build a shed in his backyard. And so he decided that he would get his 6 sons to help him. It took him all morning and half of the afternoon to round up all 6 sons. 2 were playing video games, 2 were at baseball practice, and the oldest 2 were out with friends. God only knows what they were up to. But after a time, he found them all. Then, of course, if you have kids, you know he had to buy them all food and water so that they would be able to help him without fainting from hunger or thirst, kids' drama. But he also needed to equip them with 6 sets of tools, and that was not cheap. In fact, the cost of the supplies was almost as much as the cost of the wood and nails and shingles and paint that he needed just to build a shed. If you were to add up all the effort it took to track down and instruct these boys on how to build this shed, it probably would have been much faster and cheaper if he had just built the shed himself. But eventually the shed was built, and it was perfect. Then every single day after its completion, the man would sit and he'd look at the shed as he drank his coffee in the afternoon. That shed brought him more joy than would ever seem possible. You see, not only was it beautiful to look at and useful for storing his tools, far more importantly, that shed contained memories. That shed contained memories of the time he and his son spent building the shed together. These memories were more valuable than the shed or any of the tools it contained by far. And so, for the rest of his life, he was comforted by the knowledge that while building that shed with his children, the bonds between him and his boys had been strengthened. The experience of building the shed had also created bonds amongst his kids that would last far longer and were far stronger than the shed they had built. But also, very important, the man was filled with satisfaction that each of his boys had since grown up and were now raising their own kids, and each one had been able to build their own sheds with their kids. Have any of you ever heard the saying, "The journey is the destination"? I'm sure we all have, right? Well, while what we create is important, the process of co-creation is even more important. Why is this? Because the ultimate goal is not just to become co-creators, it's to eventually become co-creators and manifestors in our own right, and to pass that ability along to those who follow us. How do we know this? Because Jesus told us so. John 10:34, is it not written in your law, I said you are gods? So as you say your prayers, always keep in mind that you have an important role to play in the creative process. Luke 12:32 tells us, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. And eventually, you will be able to create that kingdom. That's why the process is so important. So go out into the world, all of you, and build your kingdom just as Jesus said you could. Thank you.